Welcome back to the Tech Factor podcast by Purple Quarter. It's so good to have Anusha in the house. So thank you so much, Anusha, for doing this from New York so early your time. Really glad to be having you on our show.
Thank you, Rupa. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. This is for the viewers, just so that we give a little bit of introduction to Anusha. Anusha, you've done your BTech from University of Madras, and then you went on to do your master's in business analytics from NYU, if I'm correct. And you started your career as a programmer, went on to being a business and data analyst, and then moved towards actually immersing yourself into data science, right? So, could you talk a little bit about how did this journey go about for you? Because you were part of the BFSI segment, and then now you moved to United Nations group as the data sciences and analytics head. So, tell us a little more about your journey, please.
Definitely, Rupa. So my journey has been pretty much by the book by everybody else, more or less. But the way I would look back and look forward is that journey started as computer science engineer. I started my career as a trained computer science engineer, graduating from a university in India. And my first job was I landed a job in a software company based out of in India. And the luck would have it that they assigned me to the banking and the financial services sector. And when I started my journey, my first client who I started my career with happened to be a small community union bank where I was tasked with programming for the ATM machine to dispose cash. And this happened to be a bank called UNFCU, which is United Nations Federal Credit Union. So my first sort of select start statement or the employee table that I queried started with the employee the US. So I was so familiar with the data sets of the UN, and it was always sort of a thought in the back of my mind that someday I will be part of the greater system of the UN. However, I, like everybody else, I decided to test my sort of skills and also make sure that my career is very much focused on financial services. I focused on building my domain expertise because coming from a computer science background, you got to understand the concepts of finance and when it comes to back office, front office, and also when it comes to commercial bank versus an investment bank. I focused more on my investment banking sector and decided to certify myself in securities and derivatives because I landed a job in Credit Suisse where my focus was to focus on front office activities, the private wealth management division of this investment bank. That kind of gave me the catalyst or the acceleration that I needed for me to continue to focus on an investment bank sort of space. I was lucky enough that I got the opportunity to work in an investment bank in the Bahamas, and then I moved to Luxembourg. Then I also spent some time with a bank in Singapore. But I came back to New York, as luck would have it, and I ended up building my roots here in New York. And I worked for JP Morgan and most recently with Barclays. So my role in Barclays was over the 10 years of my time at Barclays evolved over time. Yeah? So I started with financial control team, then I worked with the middle office team and the front office team, and then later I was part of the crime and the compliance team of Barclays. Those kind of evolutionary life cycle within a financial services gave me the opportunity to understand the things better in the domain of finance. I quickly realized somewhere around 7 or 8 years ago, I went through a midlife career crisis. I felt like, where am I going? What is coming my way? Because, I completely believe in the Ikigai principle, right? You need to have those 3 big bubbles in your career plan. And in my career, I had the domain expertise. I had the acumen of technology and understanding of data. But what was missing is that the T-shaped skills, they would say, right? Like, you got to have a flavor of two, sort of flavor, the domain expertise and the focus area or the industry, but also a deep, depth, in-depth knowledge was so that I felt that. So I wanted to go through the traditional business school route, and I ended up applying for plenty of business schools. And that time would have it that I got pregnant, and I declined the offer that I got from NYU Stern. And the dean of NYU Stern wrote back to me asking why I declined the offer. And it was a very interesting question. I was like, okay, I declined because I'm going to be a mother and I have too much going on in my life. And he was incredibly kind to bring me for a coffee discussion and gave me the opportunity to focus on a program that perhaps might fit well with my career, with the journey that I am in my life. And he offered me the Applied Data Analytics program that is offered by NYU Stern, which gives me the flavor of both business and data science. And he was incredibly kind to coach me to consider that program. So I ended up that program, and once I graduated, Barclays was also very supportive of my career. They gave me an opportunity to manage a data science team, and we were focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and identifying ways to identify things that can go wrong with the Mac. So I was already focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning in my previous role, and specifically on data science. And come COVID, the luck would have it again. I've always been in the back of my mind that I will work for UN someday. And sometimes over the weekend, I go on unjobs.org and keep continuously applying for roles. Maybe I'm not even eligible for because, what would happen? I always had the mindset, you want to throw your name in the hat. You never know where you get picked, right? So, however, I'm also very action-oriented person, and I prefer to focus on action. So I always had this many side projects that I worked in collaboration with my friends in UN. So that kind of also gave me that 80-20 mindset. But anyway, at the end, what happened is I got the opportunity to interview, and this role landed on my plate. And in the middle of pandemic, I switched my career and I joined the UN. So in this current role, the professional journey, as you put it rightly, is that this is my true calling, I would say, because I'm not only helping the organization build the data and the data analytics practice, but I'm also supporting them with implementing real-time use, bring about artificial intelligence and machine learning to the table, and how do we want to get the best of both worlds, from the industry knowledge to the industry expertise, and also how do we want to bring that academic collaboration. So there is a lot of good sort of leadership experience that brings to the table in this particular role that I'm playing in this organization. So my professional journey, if I were to put it, I evolved from a software programmer to data science to AI sort of a focused person right now.
Wow. So it feels like it's completely like serendipity, right? You started with United Nations and you end up being the chief data sciences and analytics officer for the UN. Wonderful, Anusha. So if I were to look at it, right, so BFSI has very different data sets and what you're solving for, maybe for one particular domain, right? Whereas when you were to look at what you're doing now, these are real world problems, which I think not too many people get an opportunity to look at even the data or forget about solving about it. So could you give us a peek into, your life as the chief data and analytics officer, on how do you go about incorporating data and analysis at your work?
Yes, so the role that I play at this moment in this organization, which is UNICC, is that we are a cross-functional cross-cutting a horizontal organization within the UN system. Yeah, so our role is for us to not only serve for the digital needs of all the partner agencies who we collaborate and work with, but also incorporate data and analytics in their daily sort of work. So is the role that is pertinent to the role that I play right now. See, this particular unit didn't exist. So I'm an incumbent who is trying to bring together sort of how do we want to deliver better outcomes for our partner agencies who we collaborate and work with. So we understand and analyze the impact of our engagement and making sure that the outcomes that we plan to deliver, what are those metrics, how do we measure it? And in addition, see, for us, internally within UNICC, my role is also how can I enable our senior stakeholders in better decision making, and also how we can make the decision making data driven. And because, when very high level metrics, when you ask somebody, what do you do with data? How do you drive data change within an organization? Hey, gives you the opportunity to measure. It gives you the opportunity to measure efficiency, productivity, how do we want to recover costs, and so many things that are not looked at it from a decision or a data lens. We bring that lens to our thought process and in the workflow, and also making sure those outcomes that our partner agencies who we work with are clarified and defined, because all the focus areas within the UN is none of them are short-term or medium-term engagements. These are long-term engagements that we work with our partner agencies, and these are real-world problems that we are focused on. So in order for us to make sure that we are actually driving impact, we have to be more data-driven than anybody else.
I can imagine. Would you be able to point out any past projects or current projects that you're working on that you're allowed to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So our focus areas has been where do we fit our approaches and solutions that we bring to the table in solving real world problems. Yeah, so perhaps I can bring about two examples of real world problems that we have not only built but also deployed, and it's currently being used in production environments within the UN system. One is the use case of UNITAD, which is a data agency where we are applying artificial intelligence to identify evidences that were captured in the war crime that happened in the Middle East. We are using artificial intelligence to not only identify evidences but also spot things that cannot be spotted with human eye, because humanly for you to review terabytes of data, and then also these are unstructured data sets that you don't usually know how to get insights from. Yeah, so we do apply artificial intelligence, and this is a collaborative exercise that we did with Microsoft, and this is a wonderful use case that currently is being used for investigative purposes. This is, when I say investigative, I'm referring to war crime investigations that UN focuses on. And the second use case is one of my favorite use cases that we went all the way from whiteboarding and sort of ideation to production solution. This is publicly available. This is something that anybody can access and look at. It's called AIDA. It is Artificial Intelligence for Development Analytics. So what we do in this particular use case, or the problem that we are trying to solve, our evaluators community within the UN system, they have tons and tons of information that are published in form of PDF reports. These are documents, and these are things that are published in unstructured content. And it is incredibly challenging for our evaluator colleagues to assess, find, recommend, and also kind of come up with the conclusions of what to do with these programs and these projects, because that is incredibly time-consuming effort. So what we have done is, in collaboration with AWS, we have built a solution which is applying artificial intelligence not only to extract intelligence from these unstructured documents, but also help our investigators to connect the dots, if you may, not only to extract intelligence, but add the and of human in the loop, and also identifying how does this finding, perhaps what they found in the country of Chile, matches with what they have found perhaps in Bangladesh. So how does these data points correlate is a very, very informative information for our investigators, not only for the investigator use case, but also for the evaluators use case. So both of them are very much focused on how we can enable using data and artificial intelligence, how we can add that intelligence to the decision making and the workflow that some of our investigators and evaluators currently go through. How can we improve that efficiency, right? Like, perhaps it would have taken them days to review content. Now it's less 2 minutes to identify what's there as an insight in the report. So the productivity and bringing insights to the table shorter time frame is the problem that we are very much focused on and solving. And how can we apply artificial intelligence for good in solving real world problems was our goal in both use cases. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, really interesting. So the second one you said is publicly available. Have you seen anybody else putting this to use in other use cases? I mean, for other purposes, have you seen people applying it?
Biggest sort of goal or the mandate that our organization is focuses on right now is how can we solve for problems with a reusable mindset. Means by that is, hey, if the wheel is already invented, how do we want to add things to the wheel? This is reinventing the wheel. Yeah. So the components that we built with the thought process for both the solutions and also most of the use cases that we are currently focused on to tackle is to make sure that the components are built with a Lego block mindset, that some of the components can be repurposed and reused for a different context and for a different use case. And how do we want to bring those reusability, avoiding duplicity, and making sure that the data and the things that we bring to the table are repurposable and reusable for a different sort of a stakeholder. So we do have those thought process, not only in implementing, but from the design mindset itself. Because if you don't design your solutions to be available for reusability, there is no way for us to track it. But yes, that is one of the thought process that we put in. So one of the solution that I spoke about, AIDA, is potentially going to be a multi-agency solution wherein not just one stakeholder community within UN will be using it. They do see multiple sort of consumers who can benefit off of this solution. So we are working on road mapping it, Rupa.
Awesome. Awesome. So do you see, data is the most talked about, right? Everyone's talking about data and everyone's talking about AI and Gen AI and so many other things. So, sometimes I often wonder, do you see any challenges in data implementation in the future? Do you see that impacting, the industry at large or your organization? Just wanted to understand that piece.
There are things that does keep me up in the night. I would say definitely it's the front and center when it comes to doing data science or AI is that, see, the bias in data. Bias in data still remains as a big, big sort of a puzzle for every industry to consider and resolve. Yeah. When I say bias in data, there are various biases that get embedded when we are not overlooking these biases when we train our models, definitely making sure that the gender equity is considered, making sure that no one is left behind, and the diversity of the data that we use has considerations of all sort of human rights being considered in the data sets that we use. So bias in data will continue to remain to be a topic that we will put in front of us all the time. The second is AI governance, responsible AI. What I mean by that is that with the pace at which GenAI is progressing, and also the technology, we want to make sure that we don't run into this unforeseen consequences. We want to make sure that unforeseen consequences doesn't happen. Unlike the tech startup world, right? Like, because in tech startup, you can move fast and break things, and perhaps the motto of Facebook, it doesn't work when you're delivering outcomes for a public sector or in a public organization like the UN system. So those are sort of the things that I see as challenges for data implementation in the future. But I think those are all solvable challenges. I'm optimistic about it.
Super curious here. You spoke about bias in data biases, right? So, how do you first of all figure out there is a bias in data, and how do you actually have a checkpoint for that?
Bias in data can be not only identified, can also be mitigated in many ways. Yeah. For example, if I take the example of making sure that gender equity is considered in the data sets that you're working on, if I were to walk through an example, is that when we are representing or building a solution that is pertinent to a decision-making workflow, all genders needs to be considered and are being represented in the data is the first checkpoint. And your training sets and your test sets that you consider for your artificial intelligence algorithms, those guardrails should be implemented from the get-go, from design, how you are going to approach in solving the problem. Most data sets don't have that level of quality of data, but having spelled out that these data sets were not considered, and here's why, and what is the context of the problem that we are looking to solve, embedding responsibility, explainability, and traceability are ways to mitigate this kind of a bias that gets built into these artificial intelligence models. So there are ways to mitigate. It's just that we have to be cautious when we are designing this with a responsible mindset. Yeah.
Wow. So you really work on interesting stuff, and more we speak with you. I'm just super jealous that you get to work on this while I'm doing this, asking you questions. But Anusha,
you're welcome. You're very welcome, Rupa, to join. Yes, and we welcome everybody and anybody who can support us, because the UN we are focused on is not just for the UN; it's for everybody to be engaged to solve for, because the Sustainable Development Goals is set for the world.
Super kind of you to say that, Anusha. So I wanted to bring the focus back on the workshop that you had conducted, right? This was to tackle food waste, right, in a school. One, how did that come to you guys in terms of, that you needed first the idea of the gap being identified, then the idea, and how do you go about resolving it? Could you tell the audience how did you identify the gap right from that stage, so it'll help us a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a very big believer that the food should not be wasted. Yeah, there are parts of the world where the food is not available in plenty, and in the public school system here in United States, especially here in New York, the food get given for free. Yeah, the food that the children in the schools get is for free, and it's not like not nutritious. It's super nutritious, very well thought through food that gets given to these children. And if you look at it, if you look at the data and also look at the percentage of food that gets wasted, 40% of the food that gets given to these children on a daily basis gets either discarded or wasted and not being repurposed. Yeah.
Wow.
So how did we want to solve this problem was that we reached out to the New York City Mayor's Office colleagues, and they gave us the opportunity to identify 5 schools from 5 boroughs, and especially kids who have this sort of acumen for see how do they want to solve the problem. So what we did is we came together with few data volunteers and in collaboration with ITU at the United Nations and also the New York City Mayor's Office. And at that time, I was with Barclays, and some of our volunteer colleagues from Barclays also came together. We came up with the thought process and the framework that, hey, we want to teach the students how to capture data. If we give them the ownership of identifying or surveying how their school lunch hall looks like, or how the food that's being given to them looks like over a period of time, so we gave them a challenge for 45 days for them to capture the data and also understand how the food that is being consumed and how it's being discarded. Yeah. And they came up with all this data collection or the observations that they have made as a scientist. They were able to bring that raw data to a workshop that we did here in New York City, wherein we not only helped them look at the data and analyze the data, we guided them how to come up with a solution in solving the problem that they think is a problem that is solvable. Because we can impose many solutions when it comes to real world problems, but if the real world problems are well thought through by the stakeholders who need to action on this problem, it is a different kind of a solution that you can actually come with. And even more so, if you make that solution data driven, there is more evidences to prove that why you need to do this. The why is so clear that there is no need for you to prioritize to implement it. Right? Like, it's given that you have proven with evidence that why this solution fits the need or fits the purpose, or why this needs to be prioritized as the first to be supported. And very interesting, with extraordinary insights, the students came up with amazing viewpoints that we could have not thought through if we were to, do the traditional thinking. They came up with the thought process that, hey, by giving us a to-go container for free in our cafeteria or in our lunch halls, instead of us wasting the food, we can perhaps take it as an evening snack. That's a great idea. It's clearly a solvable problem. And second, they suggested that we want the menu to be published a week ahead of time so we can vote what we like and what we don't like. So that way, we can bring down the wastage of things that are not being liked by the students, that's being served for no reason, and we can avoid it from the get-go, that we are not serving the food that most students don't prefer to consume. So that was a great idea and out-of-box thinking, and it was through data analysis. So we didn't have to sort of convince our mayor's office, or we didn't have to convince the school administration, and it was very informative insight that we could share not only with the public administration but also with problem that they wanted to solve for.
Wow. As you speak, I was thinking of other use cases where you can actually apply this to, but I'm falling short of the use cases where it can be applied to. Not the big fat Indian weddings, definitely not. But yeah, but I agree with you. I think food wastage happens because of not being able to preempt the amount that's going to be consumed, right? So if I love the place where you're saying that you've looked at it before even food started getting made, and applying those data and analytics there. Amazing, Anusha. Amazing. That's really great. So moving along, Anusha, we would also like to speak about. I think you've focused on safety of women in digital space. I see a lot of women writing on LinkedIn, many other platforms that, hey, this is not a place where you need to ask me out on a date, or, this is a professional site, and so on and so forth, or being attacked as well personally, right? This may not just be about a date, but being personally attacked. So on this subject, why did you even begin focusing on this subject, if I may ask?
See, Rupa, I'm a proud mother of a 9-year-old, and we women, if we don't understand our issues, we cannot solve for the problems that we women face. Can be the not only the responsible stakeholder for the problems that we face as women, we also need to bring the right kind of thought process in thinking this through this problem, because the world is not designed for women. Not yet. If we want a better world, we want to design the better world for women the way we want to be feeling safe. Yeah, the safety for women, in digital space. This is a new sort of a side project, or I would not say it's a side project. This is a wonderful initiative that some of my colleagues in the UN system, especially colleagues from UN Women. I want to definitely give a big shout out to my friends Andrea from UN Women Mexico, and also my policy friend Lizette from UN Women here. So we have thought or mulled over this topic. Yes, we initially during the pandemic we did a thinkathon for public safety for women. During the lockdown, women had the most sort of vulnerable set of population, women and children. Yeah, women and children. But during the lockdown, they will find the public spaces to be safe during the lockdown, to be venturing out. So we realized that solving for a problem, especially in New York City or in Paris, we did a thinkathon in London, Paris, Singapore. We realized that we are not only looking at the problem from a women's perspective, we realized that all the women across the board, doesn't matter whether they are from New York, London, or from Singapore, have the same underlying problem of being safe. The safety is pretty much in the front and center of every woman, and they all look at the safety differently, right? And when it comes to digital space, when we look at the social media, the intrusive sort of things that happens in the digital space, to start define what are those definitions of violence against women, what is that is considered as appropriate, which is not, how can we use technologies to not only have this unsafe space. If we have to use technology to create platforms like social media, like Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, we should be using the technology to protect us too. Why not? How can we use technology to not only identify these violence against women, gender-based sort of discrimination that happens in social media platforms? How do we want to trace them, track them, and alert on certain things that can be alerted to the right stakeholders, right? The algorithm that we have built in collaboration with UNICC in Valencia and also with our colleagues in UN Women. So is that how can we alert on content that gets published in social media channels like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter? And how do we want to make sure that this voice of the women is being heard? Right? Only when you alert it through numbers, 34% of women get abused every day on Twitter.
Wow.
And this is only analysis that we did only on Spanish content. We haven't ventured into English yet. Just by looking at Spanish content in Twitter, we were able to identify the different kind of violence that is being portrayed or being shared in social media channels. Not only tracing them, we are able to alert to say that, hey, this is appropriate content, this is not, giving the opportunity for women to seek consent to publish. Right? You are giving the right for the woman to own the right of what she prefers to be published on her identity. This is not. How do we bring that consent to the table? How do we bring the rights of women where they have the right to choose to publish? Yeah. So how can we bring that voices and the force around how the digital space can be safe? is the topic that we are focused on. And this is a passion topic for me. If you ask me to talk about this topic, I would perhaps need another podcast episode, Rupa. Perhaps in future, once we have implemented this technology in Guadalajara and Mexico, I can elaborate more and share some insights on what worked well in this particular use case. Yeah. We're working on
Kudos
it.
to you
It's work
guys.
in progress.
Kudos to you guys for even thinking of it. I love the part when you say the world's not designed for women, but that doesn't stop you from designing it for yourself. Very powerful, very strong statement that you just said. So on that thought and on the conversation that we had in Delhi, so I'm just going to poke your attention to women in tech or women in data sciences. And you did talk about biases in data, right? And I get asked this question all the time because I'm a woman on the other side and I run a company, and I'm sure you get asked this, that hey, so it's wonderful for you to be where you are. Have you faced any form of bias, or has there been a ceiling, or how do other women break the ceiling, right? So what are your thoughts around that, Anusha?
See, I think there are two ways to tackle this particular problem, right? Like addressing tech and in data. How do we want to not only bring people along, how do we want to also make sure that we create that level of awareness that has been missing for a period of time, right? Like, it's not the problem of not having women, it's the problem of not having enough awareness of what kind of career opportunities that women have, what kind of possibilities, art of possibility of where women can play a big role when it comes to women in data or women in tech, right? So my thought process, the way I see this particular women in data and getting women interested in STEM careers is that one, we want to bring women along where we go. Yeah. How do we do that? Like, perhaps in the internship that we offer, we want to make sure that equal representation, 50-50 of applicants who apply for internships are given equal opportunities at the interview stage itself, right? Making that as a easy to go entry point, having internship for women in data, especially, for example, at UNICC, we make sure that when we are interviewing for candidates, we have 50% representation from women and also 50%. Otherwise, we don't even go into the process of interview, right? Like, bringing the opportunity for women from get-go, all the way from hiring for an intern to the senior leadership, needs to be thought through. Hiring process needs to be thought differently. And these guardrails needs to become more from a guard to a guide rails, because some of the corporate organizations don't have that kind of a mandate. But this is a mandate. If we become more of a guidance, kind of presents a different kind of opportunity for women to also come, right? And the second, when we engage with our capstone projects or the things that we do with our academic collaboration, and when we connect, we make sure on all the panel events, we have equal representation of women. Otherwise, we don't participate in these panel events. And we also engage with projects with academia or our collaboration. We request for them to make sure that they bring women to the front and center and also to the table before we even sign for a partnership or even engage with them. See, some of these things, if we don't do it, we women don't bring this as a factor to consider, it's never going to impact in the long run, right? And it's not sustainable either, because once we make it a rule-based approach, it's not sustainable, because who monitors this rule? Who kind of pays attention to this? Who kind of will sustain it over time? It needs to be driven by the women, for the women. I completely agree. And also we need to engage with the stakeholders at the right endpoints, right? Like, hiring process needs to be thought through, and academic institutions need to also make it easy on women to apply for these STEM programs, because the awareness of these STEM programs and the career opportunities they offer is not very familiar with the women within any society. Yeah. So That's how I see it. This is my perspective, Rupa.
Great. As usual, Anusha, very straight to the point. So I wanted to also understand in terms of if women want to join a public sector, like yourself, so
Yeah.
and want to be part of, doesn't matter what they want to be part of, data sciences or maybe analysis or even on the engineering side. But what do they need to do if you can give them a bit of, maybe a framework?
See, I believe in a sort of, I'm a problem solver in mindset. Yeah. So to take up any and all opportunities that's available to solve real world projects, right? Like, whether it is internship or volunteering, or with the UN Digital Corps and other organizations, right? Like, there's a lot of public data available. So I recommend anybody who's wanting a career in data or in tech and public sector, develop a portfolio. Yeah. What I mean by portfolio is learn to tell stories through data, perhaps review some Tableau public dashboards, publish your content in social media. Social media is a very much an engaging platform. And also engage with new technologies ahead of time. Talk about it, right? For example, you have AI, you have tested something and you found something to be sort of applicable or interesting. Talk about it, right? Like, these platforms never existed in the past. Now we have the whole plethora of opportunities. That is one way to look at it. And most of my projects that I worked on is sort of a real world project that actually ended me landing up the next job or the next role. So when you volunteer and take up your passion project, whether it is a real world project or a world project, I think when you speak what you want, I think opportunities will show up.
That's excellent, Anusha. So that's beautifully said. So people who want to join your team, if you're hiring, we'll leave your handles on the podcast for them to write to you. I love the way that you said that even with data, you can actually create a story. That's a new one. And I'm going to put that out there for people to know that that's a new one because people don't craft stories out of data, right? But you so beautifully said that you can do that. Anusha, on a lighter subject, on a lighter note, you did say that you think from a data perspective, which you're a problem solver, rational thinker, so use a lot of your left brain. But I did see that you've done a design course, which is more right brain, right? So the interior design course. So how did you hit upon that from the left side to the right side of your brain? How did you happen to get through that?
By the way, I'm like everybody else, yeah. So I went through the period of time in my career where I didn't have the work permit to work here in the States. So I ended up for a course I wanted to do, but I didn't have the sort of perhaps the time for it. So I'm a kind of person, when I have time, I sign up for courses. Right now, I'm also going through 2, 3 courses in the background because I'm a constant learner. I like to learn and sort of keep my emotional part and then also my rational part nourished, Rupa. But yes, I went through a program which is a diploma program in interior design at Parsons School. That was one best summer that I spent here in Parsons, and I believe in designing spaces that are conducive for mind, body, and soul. So that kind of experience definitely helped me nurture my what do you call the emotional side of me, Rupa.
That's really nice. I'm sorry I picked on that specific one, but Anusha, I found that to be fairly interesting when I saw the entire data set about Anusha. It was all about, being practical problem solver. So the right brain, I was just super curious. But what an inspiration, Anusha, that you've been, I'm sure, to a lot of women who are listening to this, or to anybody, right? Any potential who's listening to this podcast. I'm sure they realize that there's so much to do out there, and you've actually proven that through some of the pieces that you picked up as projects, I love the way you call some of them pet projects, but these are really meaningful ones that you're working on. I hope more people get inspired with the kind of work that you're doing. I'm so happy to have you on our show. I would love for you to have any. Do you have any last words that you want to say before we wrap the show?
Well, I think most of the topics that we focused on and what you did to focus solving and with a good heart and the intent being pure. I think the time, energy, and the resources are the three variables that you can control, and how you kind of channel it is how your career journey moves. So that's how I see it, Rupa. So thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Hopefully, my journey was informative enough, and if anybody who's listening to this wants to reach out to me, please reach me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Anusha, was extremely meaningful. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation.